The memo fell into my lap as I stepped to the podium, and the room went quieter than the carpet under my
An
heels.
internal finding.
I opened the paper with one
cannot in
finger
good
and read a
conscience read the
name.
prepared statement.
Plant incident,
Instead, I am
December
initiating
3rd,
an immediate
fatality,
internal
shame
inquiry into
rose in
these
my throat and then
allegations.
settled behind my ribs. The feeling that I had been carrying a decision I could not say aloud.
Secure the
Behind
room.
me,
Board
Miriam
members
tapped
to
my
order.
elbow with the
Now.
edge of her hand and
I needed
mouthed,
to see it for
"Ava,
myself.
do you see this?" I kept the memo folded and let the prepared dividend
Now,
statement
we clean
rest
up
on
the
my
mess we
palm
didn't
instead.
make.
That instant, shame, suspicion, and a sharp, immediate choice shaped everything I did next. I heard the scrape of a chair from the front row and saw Victor Hale watch me with his folded hands like he was testing a scale. The auditorium smelled of lemon polish and expensive wool. The stage lights cut a ring of heat across the podium. I stood in tailored deep teal, the silk pocket square at my breast a small, absurd anchor. The dividend statement had to be read at 9:30. The quarterly ritual would crown a year of record profit. The memo named a deferred safety fix and the date of a worker's death buried in maintenance logs. That was the central problem. The numbers the shareholders came to celebrate hit a cost someone had already paid. I held the paper with my left hand and let the room wait while my right thumb smoothed the crease of the memo beneath the printed figures. I could feel Miriam's presence at my side, her breath, the tap of her pen. And I could hear the auditorium repeating its habitual hush as if the building expected a show. "Ava," Miriam softly, stepping closer so her lips barely moved. "You have to tell them." I kept my voice low. "Miriam, if I read this now, we lose the market. We lose the stock. People will lose money." Miriam's eyes did not move from mine. The first external disruption came as a shareholder from the center aisle stood and shouted before I could speak, "You expect us to celebrate while someone died." A baton of murmurs extended through the seats and hit me like a physical wall. The shareholder's nameplate clattered as he slammed a fist on the armrest. "Show us the records. Show us the injuries you hid." My hands closed around both documents. The paper crinkled. I swallowed and tried to arrange my face into a neutral that would not betray the tremor in my hands. My doubt shifted quickly into fear when an aide to Victor stepped forward and leaned into the stage. His voice precise. "Chairman Hale requests that you continue as scripted," he said. "The market cannot absorb an unscheduled disclosure." Victor's aide did not say, "Please." He handed a small card toward my hand like a command. I felt anger hot under my sternum, an anger that stung the tip of my tongue and pushed me toward a decision. Miriam caught my sleeve and squeezed. In the green room minutes before the meeting, Miriam had told me long after midnight about the memo. "Ava, it was in the legal folder." I flagged it 3 times and it came back stamped "defer." She the word defer like a stone. "We deferred safety. We deferred repairs." Her voice was sharp and intent. "Miriam, who signed the defer?" "Victor's committee approved the allocation," she said. "They prioritized shareholder return. They did not approve the repair." Miriam tapped the folder again. Her pen left a tiny black line on the paper that reminded me of a bruise. I remember the way my hands had arranged the stack of statements earlier that morning, the heavy paper, the embossed letterhead, the neat columns of percentages. I had practiced the cadence of the announcement in front of the mirror. "We propose a dividend of X per share." It had been the most ordinary sentence I had ever rehearsed. Now the ordinary sentence contained a lie by omission. My shame shifted into clarity when I saw the worker's name on the incident log, Luis Ortega. I had met Luis once at a factory visit 2 summers ago. He had waved at me like he recognized the company and carried a thermos with duct tape around the lid. The memory of him bending to the conveyor belt came back as a precise image, grace on his knuckles, a faded logo on his cap, not a fogged impression. That specific memory made the cost of the numbers unbearable. Shareholders called for explanation, and the man in the center aisle unrolled his accusation. "You sold our money while you sold his life," he said. "We want answers." A woman in the 3rd row shouted a demand for the board to release internal maintenance logs. The calls multiplied and folded into one another until the meeting no longer resembled a ceremonial reading and instead felt like an inquiry. I could see the phones lifted like small, dark witnesses in the hands of people who wanted proof. Victor's face did not change much. He held his jaw like a hinge. He leaned forward and raised his hand when the chairman's gavel failed to land a rhythm. "Ava." Victor, voice low but audible to the front rows, read the prepared statement. His baritone filled the space between us without warmth. "This is not the time for an errant disclosure." I registered the words as a pressure. The room tilted toward economy and market value. My shame tightened into something I could not swallow. I had to choose between protecting valuation metrics and revealing a human death connected to the company's decisions. Miriam moved so that she was beside me at the podium and gave me one clear line. "We can file an emergency motion to delay the dividend," she said. "We can call for an audit and pause payouts until we verify the report." Her voice was brisk, efficient. She was already seeing options the way a chess player sees moves 3 steps ahead. "Miriam, they'll call us irresponsible. They'll call us impulsive. Go find the truth," she answered. "Call legal. Call security. Do not read that statement." Her fingers unclenched and left a visible space on the paper as if she had erased a plan into existence. The security team moved through the aisles like a practiced drift. A uniformed officer reached the center and held up a torn sheet of paper between 2 fingers. "Found near Gate 2, he reported. The torn report had a photograph taped to it, a blurred face in a greasy cap, a date stamped at the corner. The image rendered the anonymous into someone visible. The man in the cap matched the name on the memo. The audience took a breath that sounded like the rustle of programs flipping at once. My voice came out tight when I addressed the hall. "We have received a report that requires independent review," I said. "I will not read the dividend statement until we have clarity." The words landed with a sound like a folding chair. I felt the weight of everyone's eyes. Victor did not stand. He watched with the same folded hands. "Ava, you cannot do this," he said then, standing now and walking toward the dais in 2 long steps. "You are jeopardizing valuation. You are jeopardizing people's savings." His words were precise, but the look in his eyes carried a logic that had been built over decades. "Preserve the company, protect the legacy." Miriam interrupted with a quick, controlled motion and placed a printed emergency proposal on the lectern. "Motion to delay dividend distribution pending independent audit," she said. "I move that we call an immediate review panel." Her voice was steady. Shareholders shouted both for and against. A man near the back demanded an immediate vote. The procedural motion set the meeting on a new axis. We shifted from ceremony to governance. Victor's aide pulled his phone from his pocket and showed Victor a live feed of the trading floor. Numbers moved in green and red. The feed made the stakes visible in an immediate currency. Victor's jaw tightened. "You see," he said finally, voice iron, "you will take this company into a panic for one incident that may be unrelated." He held the phone like an evidence placard. "You will harm people who count on payouts." The argument pivoted from moral to practical. I could hear the market's pulse through a small speaker in the aisle. Checks were being rung in the public square. I refused to read and then refused again during the procedural back and forth. The room began to split along predictable lines. Those who wanted accountability now, and those who wanted stability above all. Miriam moved through the crowd and whispered numbers into ears. Panelists, independent auditors, council names. She engaged board allies the way a conductor engages musicians. "Victor," she said once, speaking his name in a way that left no room for negotiation, "we will file the motion. The board will vote." He met her gaze and the line between them held a brief, visible steel. A shareholder stood up and asked for Luis Ortega's family to be contacted. "If you care at all," he said. "Call his next of kin and tell them what you know." The request turned the meeting from theory to people. I tapped the memo against my palm, and the name Luis felt heavier than the paper. Miriam wrote a note and handed it to security with a firm, clipped movement. The hall's light felt hotter. People shifted in their seats, leaning toward or away from what would happen next. The climax arrived in a way that left no room for polite motions. I took the prepared dividend statement, folded it in half, and then tore it along the stapled edge with my thumbnail. The sound of paper tearing was sharp in the auditorium. "I will not announce a dividend while a worker's death is unresolved," I said. "This board has to account for the choices behind these numbers." Victor rose to his feet then and walked to the podium in long, deliberate steps. "Ava," he said, and his voice was low, "you have no authority to declare this in a shareholders' meeting." I turned to him while the room held its breath. "Victor, you approved the budget shifts that deferred maintenance." Miriam, stepping forward with a legal pad in hand, You sat in committee and signed the cover memo. The exchange accelerated into the rapid back and forth the rules require when two forces collide. Miriam, do not lecture me about fiduciary duty here, Victor answered. You agreed to the allocations, Victor. You wrote the minutes for that meeting, Miriam shot back. You to prioritize returns. That was a board consensus, Victor. Ava. Read the statement and take this through proper channels. Proper channels delayed a life, I said. The room broke into a chorus of voices, accusations, denials, calls for calm. The back and forth lasted 5 sharp exchanges, each one short, named and precise. Security attempted to move in as voices rose to a pitch. A senior shareholder demanded an emergency ballot and rattled off bylaw numbers. We will vote on the motion to delay, she said. All those in favor, raise your placard. Hands moved like small pale flags. The clerk called out numbers. For a minute, governance took over like an engine engaging its gears. The vote passed by a narrow margin and the meeting was suspended for an immediate review. The immediate fallout moved faster than I expected. Phones began to ring across the room. Board members huddled in tight pairs. Reporters buzzed at the periphery with recorders already on. Miriam pulled me aside into a glass-walled conference and closed the door. The pane had fingerprints from someone who had been there earlier, and the city skyline framed us in a rigid rectangle. Victor's voice came through the glass as he spoke quietly with his aide on the other side. We have to manage this, Victor. We must protect the valuation. The sentence was mechanical. Miriam laid out the steps with precise gestures. We will call legal counsel, name an independent auditor, contact the family, and freeze any dividend distribution until the audit completes, she said. She wrote a list and slid it across the table. Ava, you will appear as the company representative and sign the hold order. Her eyes locked on mine. Miriam, will shareholders sue? I asked. They may, she said. They may call for resignations. The words were specific threats, not abstractions. Victor came into the conference and closed the door behind him without knocking. He stood with his hands behind his back and spoke in measured sentences. Ava, you have made a choice that will damage our remaining quarter results, he said. You have exposed us to litigation. His posture held no apology. Victor, you exposed the company to risk by deferring repairs, I answered. You knew the date on the maintenance log. He tilted his head slightly and then, for the first time all day, his voice lost a fraction of its polish. We made a choice as a board, he said. We made trade-offs. He did not say I. A twist arrived when legal counsel sent an email to Miriam's secure line. A previously redacted memo had a new stamp, escalate, and the signature matched an archival notation I remembered from Victor's hand. The email attached a scanned page with Victor's initials. Miriam looked at the file and let out a short, controlled sound. That revelation changed the frame. The cover-up was not only a procedural error, it had a named hand. I felt the shape of betrayal tighten. My doubt had shifted through fear to anger and then to resolve in the span of a few hours. We left the conference in a different formation. Security led a short procession back into the auditorium where the clerk announced the temporary adjournment and the need for an independent review. Journalists clustered outside the glass doors and their lenses pointed at our faces like small accusatory tools. People in the audience were no longer faces in a crowd. They were names, opinions, and immediate consequences. Miriam held my arm for a steadying moment and then let go. The final scene of the chapter had nothing to do with numbers or minutes. As the hall emptied, I walked through rows that had been full only an hour ago. Programs lay like thin white ships on the chairs. Near one seat, half hidden under a discarded handout, a child's sneaker sat on the floor, tiny denim with a scuffed rubber toe. I crutched and picked it up. The sneaker fit in the palm of my hand and smelled faintly of detergent and dust. I remembered Luz's thermos and his cap. The sneaker was a concrete proof of consequence. Someone small and human linked to the anonymous cost lines on a ledger. I folded the torn dividend pages into a small packet, slid the memo inside, and walked out past the glass doors while security shepherded the board into a private meeting. Miriam walked beside me, not speaking, her hand on the folder that would be delivered to counsel. Victor stood at the end of the corridor, his silhouette framed by the late sun striking the glass. He did not call me back. I left the building with the sneaker folded into a small paper bag, and with the knowledge that the fight ahead would be public, procedural, and personal. The adjournment meant a pause in the ritual, but it also meant the start of an investigation that would examine the minutes, the signatures, and the decisions that had placed numbers above people. I held the sneaker and the torn statement in my hands like two small, unforgiving objects and stepped into the late afternoon air. The man hit my sleeve before I reached the elevator and shoved a crumpled photograph into my palm. Look at him. You signed this? Shame flashed through me so hard my fingers went numb around the paper. He kept speaking, my son. December 3rd. It was an accident. He stamped his foot on the polished stone as if the building itself owed him an answer. I did not step back. I looked at the photo, a black and white still of a hard at a bent railing, a jagged shadow across a factory floor. Shame sat under my ribs and pushed my voice small. Who are you? I asked, and the corridor hummed with the building's ventilation. The man said his name. He, the word plant worker, as if it were a title. His son had no funeral plan, only a number in an internal report. Shame was the feeling that made me move next, not speech. Shame made me follow him into the service corridor where fluorescent lights lined a narrow ceiling and cleaning carts stood like mute witnesses. The corridor smelled of floor polish and coffee. The man kept his distance, but he did not let go of the photograph. Ava Mercer, he said, you read the dividend statement tonight. The numbers were everything. My boy is the number I brought you. His voice did not tremble. It held a steady ache that made the other staffers part around us. That admission changed how I felt. Shame shifted into a cold, hard anger aimed at myself. I thought of the memo I had opened on the podium in Chapter 1. The words plant incident, December 3rd, fatality had been there, printed in a sterile line. I had felt the paper in my hand then and chosen to read the dividend numbers because the board expected it of me. The corridor man named a consequence I had not let myself see ever. Miriam from behind me, stepping out of a doorway with a folder under her arm. She touched my elbow. Her touch was brief and steady. Tell me what he said. Her eyes found the photo. Miriam's presence shifted the tone. Where shame had driven me inward, Miriam's practical pressure made me talk. I told Miriam the essential facts, the sequence, the photograph. I did not invent emotion for her. Miriam held the folder like an armor. We cannot have this in the press tomorrow. She said Victor will not allow it. He would not. Because Victor measured consequences on spreadsheets and on the pulse of the market. That thought brought another emotion. Fear of fallout, not for myself first, but for the company and for the workers whose faces I had just seen in a single torn photograph. Fear nudged at the edges of my anger. We moved into the empty boardroom. The doors whispered shut. The table reflected the rimlight of the city beyond the windows. Miriam sat opposite me and set her portfolio down with the sound a coin makes when it lands in a palm. She me what I remembered from the incident report. I recited dates and figures. I kept my hands on the table because otherwise I would fold the photograph into nothing and drop it. Miriam tapped her pen against the folder. Ava, you read the dividend statement tonight. Market confidence matters. Investors sleep on that number. She leaned forward. But investors also walk when silence becomes a liability. Her voice was brisk, full of the moral calculations that lived inside her head as much as inside her portfolio. Miriam's voice pulled me from private shame into policy arithmetic. I said, I saw a line in the memo. I had the page in my hand when the room went quiet. I read the numbers because the board needed it. I did not have the footage. I did not know the call would come. I named the facts plainly. Naming cut into the shame and made it usable. Miriam's mouth tightened. Then we have a leak or a deliberate concealment. Either way, this is legal and reputational landmines. We plan containment. We plan statements. We plan counsel. We buy time. She time as if it were a commodity she could spend. Her certainty made me quieter. I could feel my sense of agency narrowing and widening at once. We heard the soft click of Victor's shoes before we saw him. He stepped into the doorway with his shoulders even and his briefcase closed. Ava, he did not smile. His presence was the kind that rearranged voices into silence. Victor's voice sounded like an order wrapped in a statement. Exact, controlled, Victor, I said. I kept my hands on the table. He crossed the room in 4 measured steps and set the briefcase down. He did not sit. He tilted his head slightly and asked a question like he was weighing its risk. Do you know who dropped that photograph in the corridor? Ava, Miriam, Victor. The three of us made a triangle around the table. Miriam supplied the tactical notes. I supplied what I had, the memos, the reading, the corridor encounter. Victor folded his hands and listened, his steel grey eyes fixed on the photograph now lying between us. Containment is priority. The dividend statement moves markets. A wavering announcement will cost shareholders, and then our leverage to protect long-term projects vanishes. His words were precise. He did not say the cost in lives. The cost in valuation points, and those points were a ledger he trusted more than human testimony. Anger shifted again in me, from blaming myself to confronting the machinery that treated human tragedy as a line item. I said, "Victor, there is footage." A worker says footage shows negligence. We cannot bury that without someone being accountable. My voice rose a notch. It was not a moral speech. It was a direct demand for evidence and for action that did not erase people. Victor's mouth tightened. "You understand market reaction, Ava. You also understand fiduciary duty." He let the legal phrase hang in the air. Miriam's fingers tightened around her pen. She stood and moved to the sideboard, rifling through a stack of documents until she produced nothing visible and everything implied. We sat in that grid of authority and fear until the boardroom door whispered open again, and no one had expected it. A plain envelope lay on the table where our hands still rested. No one had seen anyone bring it in. The envelope was ordinary until I slit it open with my thumbnail. Inside were two things: a drive and a red, stamped internal report. The report had a header, a file name, and a stamp that read Internal Negligence Investigation. The footage label had a time code. Miriam swallowed. Victor did not move his expression. He folded his fingers over his signet ring as if testing its weight. Miriam read the report aloud, short lines clipped for clarity. Unit 3 failure. Bypass procedure not followed. Witness statement missing. Discrepancy in incident log. She looked at me and then at Victor. This proves someone altered the record. Her voice went steady and low. The revelation shifted my shame into a new emotion. Suspicion. Who had altered the record? Who decided that a life could be footnoted away? A call cut through the tense air like a blunt knock. The conference phone on the table flashed. Miriam reached for it. A man's voice, lined with wear and union code, filled the room. "This is Lewis, union leader. We have the footage. We will go public in 24 hours unless you release the file and agree to immediate safety audits." He spoke without flourish. He named the demand plainly. Victor answered back measuredly. "Lewis, this is Victor Hale. We will review the footage. Give us time to investigate properly." Lewis's laugh was short. "Time is what killed my boy." He said, 24 hours or we post it. "Your choice." The phone clicked dead on his threat. That event changed everything in a single breath. Everything after that moment compressed. Miriam switched to legal pathways. She outlined a plan that threaded worker protection with hedge statements to shareholders. She spoke to me directly. "Ava, you cannot be seen as hiding this. The market will read that as deception. You must choose how you lead this press narrative." Her choice framing put pressure back on me. The shame returned, smaller now, mixed with a tremor of responsibility. Victor called a short private meeting at his doorway. He did not summon us to a public browbeating. He closed his suite door and gestured to the two chairs. The midnight city light pooled against the glass. Victor smiled without movement. Ava, Miriam, containment requires sacrifice. We protect valuation, we protect jobs at scale. You release this, the market panics. You do not release it, you manage reputational risk carefully. Which is the lesser harm? We exchanged lines that were quick and raw. "You traded lives for numbers," I said. "You need to read that statement tonight." Victor's reply was a set of facts and a calculation. I traded risk for stability. I weighed probabilities. "That's what you asked me to do, Ava. Be decisive." The argument became rapid. "Ava, you must decide." Miriam pressed. "Ava, if you release the footage now, the stock will drop and partnerships could collapse. Victor, if we do not release, someone will leak, and the fallout will be worse. Lewis will post it regardless if we don't act." The voices layered into 3 quick exchanges, each a short sentence. This was the designed confrontation. 3 to 6 rapid back and forth lines, an argument that forced a decision. I stood. My chair scraped. I walked to the floor, to ceiling window, and looked down at the city's arteries. The executive lights of other towers blinked. I thought of the worker's photograph, the hard hat, the bent railing, and of the memo on my podium that had held the sterile word fatality. My hands trembled when I turned back to face them. Miriam placed a legal folder between us and slid a note across. We can redact names and release a partial report with an independent oversight committee that buys trust and limits market panic. It also gives workers a seat at the table. She these steps quickly, one after another, like moving chess pieces. Her plan shifted my fear into a cautious hope. Victor's eyes narrowed. We cannot allow a patchwork narrative. We need a single voice, a single timeline. Fragmented statements invite speculation. He reached for his briefcase and opened it with a slow, deliberate motion. Inside was a binder labeled with dates. He laid out alternative scenarios in clipped terms. His posture was an invitation and a threat. I knew then there was a choice that would not look like heroism. It would look like paperwork and scheduling and legal lines that shielded people or exposed them. I could hold the footage and insist on reform, or I could bury it and protect valuation. Neither option erased consequences. The moment demanded a precise action. I chose an action that felt both reckless and necessary. I left Victor's suite before midnight had become morning. I walked back to my office with the envelope heavy in my bag and the dividend statement folded inside my jacket pocket. Alone behind my door, I turned on the lamp so the light would make a rectangle on the carpet. I unbuttoned the statement and slid the USB drive from the envelope onto the table. My hands were steady when I called one outside contact. I did not speak for long. I said, "This is Ava Mercer. There is footage. If anything happens to me, release it." I gave an encrypted file transfer protocol and a delivery time. I hung up. The phone left a quiet click in the room. After the call, shame arrived again in a different language. Fear for myself and a bitter relief that I had made a concrete move. Miriam had offered a legal path. Victor had offered cool containment. The union had offered a countdown. I had offered a leak if needed, but I had not yet spoken publicly. 2 emotion shifts had happened within the chapter. Shame, anger, suspicion, fear, resolve. My choices had been pushed by external events every few paragraphs. I had argued with Victor. I had listened to Miriam. I had been interrupted by Luz's ultimatum. The pace tightened toward midnight. I folded the dividend statement inside the envelope and left a second copy with Miriam's legal folder, with instructions for her counsel to prepare a redacted, worker-centered disclosure if the company agreed. She looked at me as I slid the paper across. "Ava, be careful. Miriam, you will not have Victor's full support." She tapped the folder. "But you will have a path we can argue in public." Her tone was both a warning and a pact. Victor called from his doorway again. "Ava, you understand the market. You also understand the people who depend on its health. How will you balance both?" His question was brief, his meaning was not. I answered without grand language. "I will not let a child's death be a footnote, because it protects our balance sheet." I said it plainly. He considered the sentence as if weighing whether to write it down. He did not answer me with a long speech. He offered a cold note. "If you break rank, the board will move faster than you expect." That was a threat wrapped in corporate mechanics. The night held its breath at 12:07 a.m. A security officer knocked and delivered nothing other than a manila envelope addressed to me with no return. Inside was a single printed email screenshot. An anonymous message that read, "Careful what you do, Ava. Investors may forgive profit. They never forgive unpredictability." The note was noise and also a new variable. It changed my assessment. That was the mini cliffhanger in the middle of the chapter. The unexpected message forced me to reconsider timelines and to hurry the transfer. Miriam moved with quiet speed. She arranged for counsel to stand by. She me to prepare a brief public statement that acknowledged an ongoing investigation, promised safety audits, and committed to transparency without admitting negligence until the independent review concluded. Her plan aimed to thread a needle, protect workers and limit market panic. She prioritized the workers with concrete actions. Immediate audits, temporary plant oversight, and a fund to support affected families. She spoke in specifics so we could point to action when reporters asked. In the final phase, I made a choice that shifted the company's public narrative and my life. I sent the encrypted file to my outside contact at 12:32 a.m., the delivery confirmed. I then walked to the boardroom table and left a paper copy of the red, stamped report where Victor could see it when he returned. Miriam saw me place it and did not stop me. We had both committed to a process that would expose negligence and offer a legal route to protect workers. Victor returned and saw the report. He did not shout. He folded his hands and asked a single question. Who authorized the leak? I said I did. The word landed in the room. It did not solve everything, but it made the path forward concrete. The shame that started the chapter remained, but now it sat beside responsibility and procedural action. After the confrontation, Miriam outlined the next steps in a checklist that could survive board scrutiny. Victor withdrew his immediate public support in a controlled statement and tasked an internal review team, as he often did when he wanted distance. Miriam instructed counsel to notify regulators and to prepare a redacted briefing that included worker protections. Luz's ultimatum clock still ticked, but we had shifted the fight from moral standoff to strategic maneuver. I walked back to my office alone. The city outside was the same glass and light, but inside the building, things had changed. I folded the dividend statement one last time, slid a copy of the envelope with the footage into my bag, and left the office lamp on as a signal. I stepped into the corridor where the plant worker had pressed the photograph into my hand hours earlier. I found the same tiles, the same scent of coffee, and the same cleaning cart. I placed a small folded note on a ledge. Tell Louis I did not bury it. It was not a public speech. It was an action that named the truth. The chapter ends with the physical act that commits me to the path I chose. I closed the office door behind me, left the light on, and walked toward the street with the envelope in my bag and the dividend statement folded against my chest. The choice was made. The consequences would arrive in the morning, but the action was concrete. I had translated shame into a direct, risky movement that would either force change or cost me everything. A hand slammed a crumpled photograph into my palm before the service door could finish its hiss. "Look at him," the man said, voice raw, and the fluorescent corridor smelled of dust and damp cardboard. Shame rose like bile in my throat the instant my fingers closed around the picture. I recognized the angle, the faded jacket, the same hospital bracelet a memo had named in the report I'd seen at the podium. The concrete problem was sudden and blunt. A father's son listed in our files as a line item for the company's 3rd of December note. I had to answer why his name was on a company list. I pulled my hand back as security reached for the man. "Wait," I said. My voice was steady enough to hide the tremor under my ribs. I kept my other hand on the edge of my clutch so I wouldn't fumble the paper. The corridor lights buzzed. A loading bay door thumped somewhere deeper in the building. I could feel the echo of the memo that had arrived at the podium a week earlier. Plant incident, December 3rd, fatality. The letters still sharp in my head from when I had not read them aloud. Miriam's face flashed, her low bun the pen tapping, because she would know what this meant and how it could spread. The conflict was visible and immediate. The man wanted answers, and I had been carrying a choice I had not yet made public. "Ava Mercer," the man said, saying my name as if it were a verdict. "Why does my son's name appear in your files?" He set his jaw and did not let the security chief between us. I looked at the photograph, then at his face. He had a small scar on the cheekbone and eyes too dark in the fluorescent light. I said, "Tell me his name." He spat it out, "Elliot Park." The syllable landed against me like a physical blow, because I had seen that name on a list of costs and adjustments the board had approved. We were already moving through emotional shifts. Suspicion tightened my voice, then fear threaded my hands, then a brittle clarity settled in my jaw. The security chief stepped closer. "Sir, you need to let us," he began. "No," the father cut in. "I won't go until she tells me why." He kept saying "she," until someone else spoke the name I wore like armor. Victor Hale arrived the width of 3 strides behind security, his coat collar turned down against the draft. He stepped into the corridor with the calm that says 100 reporters were at his disposal. "Ava," he said, and his gaze swept the man as if reading a balance sheet. He folded his hands. "Let's keep this contained." The shift under my skin swung again, from fear to a low, furious determination. Victor's arrival moved the fight from the concrete into the corporate. He wanted containment. The grieving father wanted answers. "Chairman Hale," I said, and used his full title, because there was no other way to keep the exchange formal in front of security. "This man says his son is on the list." "I will talk." He looked at me long enough that I counted the small crease between his brows. Ava, he said slowly, the shareholders expect a closed session. We cannot allow this to become a spectacle. His voice was low, measured. Victor always measured consequences the way most people measure time. Containment was his preferred verb. Miriam slipped out of the shadows of the service corridor and took my arm. She had already seen the photograph. I knew that from the set of her jaw. Ava, the addendum, she said. She tapped the leather portfolio at her hip. They'll try to sanitize the statement. They will file a correction. We can hold the legal language tight and keep this from hitting the market at 9 m. Her hands were steady. Her words were a plan. In that instant I felt another emotion shift. Guilt loosened into wary hope. Miriam looked at the father, then at Victor. We have a path to negotiate restitution if we open talks, she added, and I watched the way Victor's eyes tightened. An external event broke the arrangement then. A camera phone light blinked at the far end of the corridor. A young journalist had followed the uneven trail of people and found us. He filmed the crumpled photograph, and the way the father steadied his breathing. The journalist's clip would be online in minutes. The possibility of a leak moved the stakes higher. The father stepped forward and shoved the photograph back at me. You signed this, he said. You signed whatever, let it happen. His voice broke and then steadied into accusation. Ava Mercer, why did you sign it? I saw the memo again. The creak of paper at the podium, the line I had not read aloud, the silence after the board's approval. The memory was concrete. Miriam had slid a folded paper into my hand backstage. The photograph, though, made the memory human. I had to answer in words he could hold. Elliott Park was listed as part of a plant incident, I said. I kept my sentences short so the security chief could not accuse me later of anything I had not said. We lost a worker on December 3rd. I am responsible for how we report that. My mouth tasted of metal. The father repeated his son's name. He demanded numbers, dates, the name of the contractor. Tell me who signed it, he said. Victor's hand brushed his signet ring. Ava, he said, clipped. There are legal risks in any admission. The board has opted for a careful approach. Miriam's eyes snapped to mine. Ava, she said under her breath. They cut maintenance schedules. I can prove it. I have the memos. If you refuse to sign the sanitized addendum, I'll withhold the filing. But you must be ready for the fallout. Miriam's voice carried the clean, practical strain I had come to rely on. Her decision was a pivot away from cover up. The security chief tried to bridge the father and Victor, but the journalist's phone chimed as a live clip uploaded. A small crowd began to form in the atrium beyond the service doors. An echo of footsteps, the click of camera shutters, the hush before voices start. The building's atrium was a cathedral of glass. I could already feel the swell of attention moving in our direction. Each new phone light was an external event that forced a new choice. Miriam took me by the arm and steered me into a small conference room backstage. She closed the door with a slow hand and slid a folded memo across the table toward me. The paper had Miriam's neat handwriting in the margin and corporate stamps. This links the recent cost, cutting to the plant incident, she said, inventory reassignments. A memo to defer certain repairs. Look at page 3. I opened it with one finger and read the line item that named the contractor change and the budget reductions. The shift in my chest was immediate. Shame tightened, then a steady physical resolve rose. The memos were proof. Miriam's quiet revolt had become evidence. This is on the record. Miriam, I will not file the sanitized addendum without talks. I will refuse. She looked at me when she said it. If we don't open talks, it will leak and the market will punish us more than a single admission. She was already thinking of the calculus in human terms. The decision she offered me was both a way out and a risk. I thought of shareholders, of quarterly calls, of the polished faces in the hall where I had once practiced my smile. Another external event, a security alert on my phone. The journalist's clip had reached a local feed and the first comments were public. People were already saying the company had hidden accidents. Someone in the atrium shouted the father's name. The crowd at the glass wall gathered like a slow, visible pressure. The journalist recorded a new line. Why won't they answer? The clip pushed the story into public view. The room we sat in felt suddenly small. Victor called an urgent, closed meeting in the glass-walled executive boardroom. I could see him arrange the chairs with the precision of someone arranging chess pieces. Board members arrived already murmuring. The room smelled of coffee and leather. Victor laid out the options in a way that removed softness from them. Sign the scripted dividend statement that omitted the plant incident, or suffer a leak that would devastate valuation and investor trust. Ava, he said. You must choose between the financial certainty of the sanitized statement and the reputational risk of disclosure. He looked at me without flinching. I felt the moral math-like weight on my shoulders. The board members offered one-line interventions. We can't allow investor panic, said one. We must protect stock price, said another. Miriam tapped her pen. We can open talks and craft restitution that limits legal exposure, she said. The board's voices were a chorus of fiduciary duty. The conversation became an argument with rapid exchanges. We need to be practical. Victor, Ava, signed the statement. We do a controlled disclosure later. You want me to sign, I answered. You were asking me to erase his name from public record. We are protecting the company, Victor replied. Protecting the company at what cost? Miriam interrupted. Do not ask Ava to lie. Miriam, the market. Victor began. And the man in the corridor deserves a hearing, Miriam finished. The rapid back and forth changed the temperature. The argument had 3 to 6 quick lines as required. It revealed positions and fracture points. Board members shifted in their chairs. I realized how many choices in that room had already been made without my full knowledge. After the closed meeting, security corralled the father and led the journalist away. But outside in the atrium, the small crowd grew louder. The glass facade amplified voices rather than containing them. When I stepped onto the atrium floor, the circling sound of phones and murmurs hit me like heat. The father's voice rose. My son died at a plant. He yelled, you made it a profit line. You signed away a life. His words landed on the polished floor and traveled. I walked to the podium because I could not let the prepared script do this for me. I took the printed statement from Miriam, the one the legal team had prepared. It was clean, clipped, and careful. Someone had inserted a parenthetical note about regrettable incidents and corrective action. I set the page on the podium and folded my hands around it. My hands were still shaking when the microphone picked up breath. I had moved through an internal arc, shame to anger to decision. So quickly it felt like stepping off a curb. The crowd quieted in that sudden way crowds do when they expect spectacle cameras panned. Victor stood near the front row, his jaw barely moving. Miriam stayed behind me, hands clenched at her sides. The father stood under the balcony with the photograph visible in his hand. The journalist had positioned himself close enough to catch every angle. I did not read the prepared lines. I set the sanitized page aside. I said, there was a plant incident on December 3rd. A worker died. The sentence halted in the atrium like a dropped tool. Some people breathed out. Others leaned forward. The journalist's phone rose. The shift hit the room at once. Gasps moved through the seats. I named the worker. Elliot Park. The father's shoulders dropped, then tensed again. He stepped forward. Yes, he said. Elliot, my speaking the name was a tangible change. Victor's composed mask cracked. He stepped toward me and then paused, measuring whether to seize the microphone. Ava, he said outside the microphone, this will be chaos. I answered him by placing the folded memo Miriam had given me on the podium so anyone could see the line items. Miriam has provided documentation linking budget decisions to the plant incident, I said. I spoke in short sentences so the legal team could not later edit me into different statements. A journalist shouted a question. Who signed the change in maintenance? The board members in the front row shifted, some avoiding eye contact. I looked at Miriam. Miriam, I said, tell them what you found. She stepped up behind the podium and read 2 sentences from the memo, citing dates and an internal directive to defer scheduled maintenance. Her voice was steady and direct. Miriam's action changed the dynamic. The company's narrative now had to account for documented choices. Noise rose. A security chief moved to the podium to quiet the crowd. Victor leaned close to me and whispered, "You are destroying us." His breath smelled faintly of expensive cedar. I did not answer him with words that could be clipped and sold. Instead, I took the photo from the father with his permission and read the name one more time. Elliot Park, I said. He worked on December 3rd. He is not a line item. He was a person. That was the chapter's peak. Cameras fed clips of my refusal to read the sanitized addendum, of Miriam reading the memo, of Victor's tight face. An external twist followed the climax. A shareholder in the crowd stood up and asked whether the board would resign. The question landed like a new lever. Board members exchanged swift looks. The company response had to be immediate. Security moved to contain the father and the journalist, but the live feed had already multiplied. Comments and accusations paddled through the building's internal channels and then into public feeds. The board erupted into murmurs. Victor's confident posture shifted into thinly veiled fury. He said more sharply now, "This is reckless." Miriam placed a hand on my elbow, the steadying touch I'd seen before in quieter rooms. We reached another small twist. The legal counsel in the room announced she would not sign off on a sanitized filing without a full internal review. That meant no quick correction could erase the moment. The board's plan for containment had collapsed into a new public emergency. The narrative that once sat neatly in our control was spilling into open channels. That revelation changed how the board would act and how investors would respond. After 40 minutes that felt like a slow unspooling, the crowd thinned. Security escorted the father out with the assurance that the company would meet to discuss restitution. He gave me a short, hard look before he left. "Don't talk for me," he said. "Talk to me." His demand was precise and final. I promised him, quietly, "I will meet you in the corridors afterward." Murmurs followed me like footfalls. Board members argued in low voices. Victor's expression had hardened to something older and colder. Miriam walked close and said, "You did what you had to do. Now we plan next steps." She already sketched out the immediate work: public statements, legal review, crisis counsel. The emotional tone shifted from confrontation to consequence planning. We had chosen exposure over containment. Now we needed to manage the fallout. Alone in the executive elevator, the doors sliding shut behind me felt like a stage curtain. My hand still trembled. I took out my phone and scrolled through the feed until I found the father's clip. The photograph lay folded in my palm in memory. Shame moved through me again, this time coupled with a steady resolve I could name: responsibility. I dialed the number the father had given the security chief. My finger hovered before I pressed call. The last external event of the chapter had to be concrete and actionable. The phone connected. A voice answered, careful and jagged. "This is Elliot's father. You are Ava Mercer." "Yes," I said. "I'm coming to meet you." "Name the time and place." "I'll be there." He hesitated, then said a time. I wrote it down. The elevator dinged at my floor. The doors opened to the quiet of the executive corridor. I put the phone away. The last line I let myself think was not a speech, it was a plan. Meet the father, open the documents, and let the consequences fall where they must. The doors closed behind me as I stepped into light that would now see what I had chosen. The sneaker appeared as I counted the second line on the page. Shame hit first, a tightness at the base of my throat that made my voice catch, and then a man on the auditorium floor was shouting for answers. He held the child's sneaker above his head so the whole room could see the scuffed toe and the dried mud along the sole. "You killed my boy," he said. And the applause that had been building for the dividend announcement died in a handful of scattered coughs. Shame drove the first motion of my hands. I kept the paper I was meant to read folded flat between two fingers, as if pressing ink could stop its shape. I had rehearsed this announcement in the mirror at 6 that morning. I had practiced the exact rise and fall the board expected. I had practiced smiling when the cameras rolled. Now a sneaker and a father's voice made the numbers obscene. The conflict was simple and urgent. Read the numbers and guard the company's valuation, or stop the page and face the truth that the numbers had cost someone a life. That tension, shame pulling at me, duty pressing on the other side, set every choice I made for the next hour. I moved a step toward the microphone because that was the script. My palm brushed the podium's polished edge, and I tasted metal. Someone on the floor shouted, "Ava, tell us why the plant report was buried." The demand landed like a thrown coin. I heard Victor Hale say my name from the head table before I spoke. "Ava," he said, measured, close enough that the syllable felt like a reminder of expectation. The baritone loosened the air for him. Miriam Park's hand folded a paper into my palm behind my back. I felt the crisp edge and the sudden shift from public to private. I looked down at the memo she had pressed into me. It had red marks across a spreadsheet and a 2-paragraph summary that named dates and ignored safety warnings. My eyes caught the words, plant incident, December 3rd, fatality. That sentence landed with the same bluntness as the photograph they'd shoved into my hand off an elevator months before. Shame shifted into fury. I tightened my grip on the memo and listened. "You will read the dividend, Ava." Victor, standing. He straightened his tie with slow fingers, but he did not reach for my hand. "The shareholders expect numbers. We stay on message." His voice did not rise. He didn't need to. The room had been conditioned to obey. His posture ordered the next motion. Miriam leaned in. "Ava, that memo lists ignored inspections and cost, cutting tied to the bonus line. This isn't a rumor." Her voice was low, clipped by the corridor's backstage acoustics. "If you read the prepared statement, we bury this further. If you stop now, you force a different light on the board." Her eyes met mine. She used my name like the hinge of a door. I felt another emotion move through me like a shifting stone. Doubt. Doubt flickered between anger at myself and fear of what halting the announcement would do to the company, to people's pensions, to the reputation I had been raised to protect. That doubt pushed and pulled against the shame that came from knowing my signature had been on approvals that prioritized cost savings over a safety checklist. I thought of the photograph pressed into my hand in the corridor 2 chapters ago, a small sleeping face, December 3rd written on the back, and I could not displace its weight. An attendee rose and walked down the aisle. I recognized him from the backroom altercation, the man who had shoved the photograph into my palm outside the service door. He was closer now, and he had a petition rolled in his hand. "We want answers," he said. "You can't hide this in the numbers anymore." He spoke to the auditorium and to the cameras. The petition rustled. The sound penetrated the stage noise. "Miriam," I said, and found that my voice had lost the practiced cool of the rehearsal. "What exactly is in that memo?" I kept my hand on the paper, my fingers connected to proof, inspection logs we flagged and recommended stoppage for repairs. "Miriam." Cost memos showing the decision to delay. Email threads where a safety manager's concerns were dismissed. It ties the dividend payouts to choices that reduced expenditure on maintenance. She slid the memo across the table so my hand couldn't refuse it. "Read it. You need to know what you would be endorsing." Her tone carried something else, not pleading, but a sternness that asked me to be the person who could act. Victor moved to the head of the table. "The floor is getting agitated," he said into the microphone that had been set up for Q. "And, we will take questions after the presentation." He used the word "we," and the "we" framed a shield. He looked at me, and his eyes were a precise measurement. "Ava," he said, "deliver what we rehearsed. The market will punish uncertainty." His lips made the shapes of cold consequence. A man in the second row shouted, "You already punished someone." There were a few sharp claps, a smear of angry voices. The cameras pivoted. Security shifted in the aisles, small men in dark suits whose shoulders tightened as if bracing for contact. The room had the feel of a sealed system suddenly pierced. I had to decide within seconds. My face felt warm under the rim lights. My hands remembered the thin gold cuff and the silk pocket square my father had insisted signified steadiness. I remembered the memo that had arrived on my desk last month, the one that wanted a quiet settlement, and the folded photograph shoved into my palm in the hallway. 2 months of events stacked against me now, physical and undeniable. I stepped to the microphone and let the prepared page rest on the podium. I could see the dividend table across the top of the page, neat columns of numbers. The numbers were not abstract. They reflected overtime cancelled, machines deferred, maintenance put off, and a child's life buried in a column labeled cost optimization. The thought of speaking those numbers unchanged tightened my jaw and summoned a new motion. "Refusal." "I won't read it," I said. The words left before I could shape them into the board script. The room inhaled, not the prepared statement. Victor's fingers went to his signet ring. He did not step forward. "He did not need to, Ava," he said. "Quieter now. You can't just stop." "Victor, stop." Miriam interrupted. "Let her speak." Her voice cut the two of us with a practical edge. "Let her be clear. If this goes poorly, at least it was truthful." She named the consequence in a way that made it feel tangible, not theoretical. Victor looked at Miriam. "Miriam, this is not the floor for policy." "Victor." "Miriam," and her tempo changed. "This is the floor where a man is lifting a shoe and asking why a child is not sitting on his lap. That belongs in policy." There were 3 rapid exchanges then. "Victor, If we stop, markets will react. Miriam, then let them react to truth. Victor replied, we manage consequences. We don't manufacture chaos, Miriam shot back. You manufacture chaos when you hide it the back. And fourth had the clipped rhythm of negotiation and accusation. Each name punctuated the lines like a stake. Other is me, I told myself. I pushed back against the urge to let others decide my motion. The auditorium felt too small for the history that hung behind me. My father's voice in conference rooms, the way Victor had taught me to mask doubt with cadence. The quiet, steady presence of Miriam when numbers needed translation into human terms. Shame shifted into clarity. The emotion changed my posture, hands steadied, voice narrowed, decision consolidated. I folded the prepared dividend page in half, then in half again. The action made a sound close enough for the nearest cameras to catch, a small, precise crease. I looked at the man holding the sneaker. I will not read the prepared statement, because the prepared statement omits a death linked to our cost decisions, I said, speaking each phrase distinctly. My voice had the low, warm quality I used in private and the hard edges practiced for the public. We will open an internal inquiry immediately and commit to compensation and transparent reporting for the consequences we find. The words landed like a released bolt. A harsh chorus of reactions followed. Some people shouted for resignations. Some people cheered. A woman at the back began to sob. Security moved forward and then paused as Victor raised his hand to stop them. The room fractured into sections of disbelief, fury, relief, and opportunism. A camera panned on my face, close enough to see the small scar along my left eyebrow. I realized, in a particular and physical way, that my decision had altered the room's geometry. Victor walked to the microphone and spoke into it with measured tones. This is an extraordinary move, he said. We will cooperate with a full review. We will also ensure continuity for shareholders. His words attempted to bridge both camps. When he looked at me, his gaze was compact, like a set of scales. Ava, this will cost us, he added, not as a question but as a fact. Victor. I understand the cost, I said. I understand what a drop in valuation does to employees' retirement plans. I also understand what burying a death does to families. The sentence was short. I let it sit like an object in the air. The auditorium graced itself with tension. An aide reached across the head table and slid a folded internal report toward me. Miriam had already placed one in my hand backstage. This one included an email thread I hadn't seen. The top message was from a line manager with the subject, Safety stop recommended, December 1st. The thread showed a reply that said, delay recommended per budget. The physical sequence of emails was a small machine that had turned into a human casualty. My stomach clenched and the shame became a concrete ache in my muscles. A reporter in the press riser called out, Ms. Mercer, will you resign? The question came from a voice trained to find ruptures. I did not answer with a generic decline. No, I said, not now. I will oversee the inquiry. I will also ensure compensation for those harmed. I will not hide the truth, saying that felt like making a pact on stage. Victor moved closer after his public statement and did not lower his voice. Ava, once you open this, cameras and lawyers and regulators will follow. We will lose points on every index. The board expects you to consult. He stopped because a shareholder at the easel interrupted him with another shouted demand, consult me. The shareholder said, consult my son's grave. His voice was raw with grief and accusation. A man from security touched an easel seat to steady the shouting attendee and then let go. The physical contact underscored the human stakes. Miriam came up beside me and laid a hand on my forearm, a brief and steadying hold ever. She said, you did the right thing. We will build our case methodically. The line was short. Her presence anchored the motion toward investigation and away from chaos. Victor's mouth flattened into a line. He put his hand on the head table and leaned close to me. This will destroy reputations, he whispered. It may take the company with it. His words were deliberate. He was testing my resolve. His voice did not shout, but it carried the weight of possible loss. I felt something like resolve and dread at once. Resolve because I had acted to make the company accountable, dread because accountability invited immediate unraveling. Emotion shifted again from clarity into a sober acceptance of consequence. I could feel the change as a tightening behind my ribs and a slow release that steadied my jaw. I know, I said. I accept the personal and professional consequences if it means we stop hiding harm. The The sentence closed like a door. The next hour was a storm of motion. Shareholders demanded immediate votes. Cameras panned. The board convened an emergency meeting in the wings. Security escorted agitated attendees from the floor. Victor called for a private session at the end of the days. Miriam and I retreated toward the backstage corridor where the light framed the city skyline through glass. In the corridor, an investor's assistant accused our counsel of cover up and thrust papers at a board aide. The physicality of papers changing hands seemed to accelerate events. Miriam flipped through the memo pages again and pointed at line items that showed who had signed approval for deferrals. Each signature was a physical imprint of choice. This is audit trail. We can reconstruct timelines and who decisioned what. We can name names. Her tone mixed practical calculation and moral insistence. Victor closed the emergency door behind him and did not look at me when he spoke. We will limit the inquiry's scope, he said. External counsel, limited release. We manage the narrative. His hands were steady. If you insist on public admissions, be prepared for calls from regulators and press. He did not offer comfort. He offered a conditional route that tried to contain the damage. I answered with a scene I had not rehearsed. No, I said. External counsel, yes. Full disclosure, yes. Full compensation, yes. We will publish the findings and we will not hide them in a supplemental note. We will name the failures and create a remediation plan with timelines. My sentence list was spare and direct. I did not argue the market's judgment. I presented a plan. Victor's jaw tightened. You will cause volatility, he said. Do you understand volatility? He named a real cost. People's jobs, trust in the stock, potential layoffs. The words landed like a ledger entry. Miriam responded before I could. Victor, the ledger already includes a child's funeral. Which volatility are you protecting? She the question plainly. The word funeral hung heavy and precise. The corridor held a breath that had nothing to do with atmosphere and everything to do with consequence. There was a staffed pause. A camera crew rounded the corner and aimed a lens at our group. The conference corridor's glass reflected the skyline and our faces. The reflection was not metaphor. It was a literal doubling of what the public would soon see. My watch, a slim instrument on my wrist, registered the time. Late morning, that small fact kept me anchored. An early twist appeared when the security chief produced a sealed internal memo from a junior supervisor who had been told to adjust an incident report. The memo contained a handwritten note. Adjust report to match prior narrative. That sentence changed how I understood earlier events. It shifted culpability from a single moment of neglect to an organized act of rewriting. The twist forced a new question. Who had instructed the change? The discovery moved the investigation from looking at cost decisions to examining an internal culture of concealment. Miriam nothing for a moment. Then she said, this is not just budget choices, this is decisions to conceal. We must include that in the inquiry scope. She looked at me for a second that said she had my back, completely and without theatricality. Back on the stage, the father who had raised the sneaker was escorted forward by a plainclothes aide. He came to stand below the podium, and he did not have a petition now but a single folded photograph. He pressed it into my hand without waiting for permission. The photograph was the same angle I had seen before, a boy with a chipped front tooth sleeping in a worn blanket. My fingers closed around the image like a mechanical reflex. The room hushed not because the microphones lowered but because the photograph altered the terms of hearing. You signed papers. You would tell the truth, his voice broke. You that when I pushed the photograph into you in the corridor, he stared at me. Do you remember? The accusation summoned a memory with tactile detail. The man's rough palm and the photograph's damp corner. I remembered the elevator's hum and the smell of dust in the service corridor. The memory was not a blur. It was composed of exact sensations. I answered him directly, yes, I remember your voice. I remember the photograph. I remember a memo on my desk I did not know the full scope of until today. I did not offer platitudes. I offered facts and the commitment I had just given publicly. A mid-chapter cliffhanger arrived like a closing door when the press room's feed flashed a breaking headline. Company stock down in pre-market trading after the on-stage interruption. The headline forced everyone into the reality of external consequences faster than strategy sessions could anticipate. It was an external event that demanded immediate recalibration. I felt a new tightness, fear about the company's ability to survive the blow. But fear did not dissolve the earlier decision. It sharpened my resolve. If markets punished us for truth, the penalty would be part of accountability. We moved into the boardroom, the head table filled with the usual people's faces. Counsel in navy suits, the Safo with reading glasses perched where she could see every line, and Victor, whose composure had the look of an instrument tuned to measure risk. Miriam and I sat side by side. The board demanded votes. The press hovered behind glass. The board split quickly. Some argued for damage control. Others, seeing the handwritten note and the email threads, advised that transparency was safer than exposure through a regulator. The exchanges were sharp. If we disclose now, we control the narrative. Miriam, if we hide, a regulator will find it and penalties will be worse. A director with a soft voice replied, we risk litigation. We risk jobs. We risk a takeover attempt. The push and pull had a rhythm of legal and fiscal concern. Victor leaned across the table and spoke in a low tone to the council. Find a way to manage litigation exposure while maintaining public disclosure. His sentence was a command that sought compromise. But Miriam's voice, clear and steady, interrupted. We can't negotiate truth into a footnote. The line landed like a bell. I watched signatures go onto the motion to open an independent inquiry with external counsel and a public report. Some hands were reluctant, some were firm. When the vote passed, the lift of relief in the room was small and complicated. Relief for accountability, dread for consequence. As the room emptied and the press continued to ask questions through the glass, Miriam and I gathered the memos and the photographs. Victor remained at the head of the table, phone in hand, plotting the next moves. He approached me and, without ceremony, placed his palm lightly on the back of a chair. There will be fallout, he said. You know that. It was not a threat. It was an observation, I know. I said I accept it. The sentence was short and exact. Later, when the auditorium emptied and the city sunlight poured through the conference wing, I folded the torn Dividend page again and discovered a child's sneaker tucked beneath a chair. Miriam had told me earlier she had taken it from the man so security would not lose it in the shuffle. The sneaker was small and marked with mud and glue residue. I picked it up and turned it over in my hands. The rubber sole left a faint dust print on the paper of the Dividend page. The concreteness of that print, dirt transferred to paper, made the abstract decisions of spreadsheets and board minutes feel immediate and physical. Miriam stood beside me and pointed to a line on a report that recommended compensation models tied to lost wages and perpetual support. We can draft this today, she said. We can propose payments and timelines, and we can set an oversight committee that includes families. Her voice had practical energy. She moved through details as if assembling a machine. The plan made accountability actionable. Victor watched from the doorway. For the first time in our exchange, he did not speak. He folded his hands and looked at the skyline. Then he turned and said, Ava, whatever you do, make sure you can stand behind it in court, in front of shareholders, and in front of families. The triad of audiences he named was precise and unavoidable. I put the sneaker into my portfolio along with a folded copy of the memo and the torn Dividend page. The items fit together like objects carrying a history. I did not make a speech. I didn't need to. The act of putting those things into a private place felt like making a promise to act on what I had seen. We issued a statement before noon that summarized the inquiry and the commitment to compensation. The language was careful and direct. Miriam had drafted it. The markets responded with a sharp drop that afternoon. News anchors passed the motion and pundits predicted short-term pain. Regulators called. Lawyers sent lists of questions. Investors demanded interim reports. The sequence of external consequences began immediately. Every item in that chain was a concrete consequence of the decisions we had made. Night came with fewer lights on in the building. Victor left before the final press debrief. Miriam stayed to go over the first tranche of documents. And then she put her hand to my shoulder in the way she did when numbers had to be translated into action. You did the right thing, she said again. This time without argument. The sentence was brief. The approval carried weight, not as praise but as confirmation. Alone in the empty corridor that overlooked the city, I sat and unfolded the torn Dividend page once more. The crease lines matched the fold where I had withheld the announcement. The small child's sneaker left a faint dust mark on the paper that had once been a ledger of success. I ran my thumb along that grit and it left a streak across the inked numbers. The physical smear felt like an index. Here is profit, here is loss, here is consequence. There was no grand enunciation. Instead, there were practical moves. External counsel retained, an independent oversight panel convened that included a family representative, compensation schedules drafted. Internal compliance restructured with mandated inspections and a new whistleblower channel. Each item was an action. Each action shifted how the company would operate. When I closed my portfolio, I took a breath that had the taste of coffee and paper dust. I thought of the man in the easel and of the photograph shoved into my palm months ago. And I thought of how a petition and a sneaker and one father's voice had turned a prepared dividend page into testimony. I felt shame early that morning, then anger, then doubt, then clarity, then resolve, then dread, and finally a hard, practical calm ready to do the work. I left the corridor and walked out through the conference doors. A security officer handed me my coat without speaking. The city pressed against the glass. Traffic lights, ordinary people going on. I put the portfolio under my arm. Before I stepped into the elevator, I unfolded the torn dividend page and slid the photograph back into the pocket where the sneaker rested. I closed the portfolio and felt the object settle together. I did not promise a new life. I made a list of changes to enact and the first names of calls I would make in the morning. Of a Mercer is a name that had meant inheritance and stewardship. Today that name had also meant accountability. I did not know every consequence that would come, but I knew the immediate outcome. An inquiry, compensation, and the beginning of a process that would place the company's numbers beside the people those numbers affected. I put my hand on the elevator button, and the doors closed over the city skyline, burying the light for a moment. I pressed the button for the lobby, and when the doors opened, I stepped out into an ordinary afternoon, and the first of many practical actions I had to take. The sneaker made a faint dust mark on my palm as I held the portfolio, a physical reminder of the cost I had chosen to expose. When I reached the lobby, Miriam called my phone. I answered. She only one sentence. "Prepare the timeline. The family liaison wants updates by dawn." I reply, "I'll be there." I ended the call and walked toward the street. The final scene of that morning, the torn page, the photograph, and the sneaker tucked into my folder, stayed with me as a set of objects I could point to when I described why I acted. The weight of them was not a metaphor. It was a series of things I could show. I folded the torn dividend page one last time and slipped it into my portfolio before I closed the conference door behind me.